All right. What episode are we on? 7?
I think it's 7.
Okay.
I think it should be a running gag that we never know.
Yeah, let's just call it. Let's just call this 7 because 7 is a lucky number.
For today?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. All right. Yeah.
There's no reason why it should be lucky, but
Okay. All right. All right. All right. Do we want to put this in? That's a real question.
I mean, at this point, you've already paused and had an awkward silence, so absolutely not. Anyway, this is the 7th episode of our OK&Y podcast, brought to you by me, Yichin, Oliver over here, who has been kind of making awkward pauses, just like I did, and Kenny.
Hello,
Alrighty, and
live from Australia.
yeah, and today we are going to be talking about, I guess, the Fab's recent ban list announcement, which I wouldn't say took everybody by surprise, but it certainly was surprising, to say the least.
That's still a surprise, you said.
Some people were expecting it, so it wasn't everybody who was surprised by it, but I was very surprised by it.
I was surprised by it.
I'm sure, yeah, everybody else here was surprised by it. So yeah, let's just get right to it.
I would say that I was surprised by the fact there was an announcement, but not surprised at the particular cards that got banned. If that makes sense.
That is true. That is
So
true.
I didn't know an announcement was coming, but when an announcement had come, it didn't surprise me that much that I guess the specifics of the cards was I know a bit lost on me initially, but I knew it was going to be something to do with chain.
Yeah, and we had 2 cards banned, or technically not 4 cards banned because one card is a common and has 3 variants. Seeds of Agony from Monarch and Duskblade, which was banned about 3 days before official release, which was surprising for a lot of reasons. So what are your guys' thoughts on the ban in general? I guess we'll just start with Oliver first.
I guess so. I'm not really big on wanting to ban such staple cards for heroes. So I'm kind of against the ban, even though Chain was like a polarizing force in the meta. Like everyone built their decks around him. But I'm not too big on banning this one card that like really supports what is it?
The entire archetype, basically.
Yeah, their whole game plan, right? So yeah, that's my view. What about you, Kenny?
Well, for me, I think that ultimately I'm all for game balance, right? And it was clear that Chain, despite the fact it didn't win the calling, is like by far and away the most dominant and consistent deck in the format. And so, as far as for game balance goes, I think it's totally fine. I do agree with you, the sentiment at least, that I would rather a deck be tuned down in power rather than completely broken in half by a ban, right? Like if a ban effectively bans the deck, then I don't think that's very successful, unless the deck itself is purely toxic. I don't think this might be controversial. I don't think Chain as a deck concept, or at least as a hero concept, is purely toxic. It's just more the fact that he was overwhelmingly powerful. So I can't speak too much as to whether Seeds is the correct ban. I hope it's not backbreaking for it and that Chain is still a viable hero, but hopefully it will dial him back. And I imagine that's what LSS is trying to do. So I think that as far as actually banning cards goes, it's good that LSS acted, right? So I have no problem with that whatsoever. Even the preemptive ban, I don't have a problem with. There's a big but we'll get to that later.
And I kind of agree with you there, Kenny. One of the big things about Seeds of Agony was that it basically made up the bread and butter of every chain deck. And now that Seeds of Agony is banned, the chain deck has not too many tools to replace it. The best possible replacement is probably like Dimensional Crossroad or Dimensional Gateway. Is that a Blood Debt card?
No.
That's not a Blood Debt card. Okay, so he doesn't have actually anything to replace it with, honestly, which is a little concerning for the deck archetype in general. Many people who are currently brewing with the new chain are dialing back their aggression and looking to build a more mid-range, arcane damage ping heavy chain. But yeah, it was it effectively is basically killing the Riftbind archetype in half, and I'm honestly not sure if they'll be able to pull off Eclipse either now. So basically, chain decks are going to have to go back to the drawing board. And some of it is a deck building challenge, so I do appreciate that the community is taking this in a positive, or rather, the chain community is taking this in a positive way and using this to possibly salvage what's left of their deck. But yeah, I'm not a fan of the Seeds of Agony ban. I think smaller cards should have probably been hit first. I'm honestly not sure what I would choose. Probably one of his go again sources, or some other way to that Chain has been able to resist the other deck's aggressions. So maybe Carrion Husk. But I can also understand why they might not be so keen on banning a legendary or majestic card.
Ooh,
Except
ooh, 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 ooh.
Yeah, I know, right?
That
Go ahead.
Oh boy, I have a lot to say on that.
Mhm.
But yes, so I can totally agree in the sense of I understand why there may be some hesitancy around banning such an expensive card,
Mhm.
or such like a rare card to get. Because I mean, I was looking at the price of Enlightened Strikes because I sold mine once quite a while ago, and I was like, maybe I should get them back.
Mhm.
And I looked at the price of the unlimited ones, and I was like, ooh, maybe not.
I know, right?
Um, yeah, it's absolutely insane. And so I can imagine if something like Command and Conquer or Enlightened Strike got banned, people would riot, right? Because that's like hundreds of dollars that is effectively down the drain.
Absolutely.
But that being said, if that was the correct choice for game balance, why would you not do it?
So I will argue against this, the Carrion Husk slash Art of War, whatever other generic majestic that it could have been banned, because banning that will have collateral damage on other heroes. I imagine
I
what
do agree.
part of their hesitancy for a Carrion Husk ban is they don't want to make Levia even less viable.
what do you think about
Yeah,
restricted stuff?
So restricting it to so that you can't run it with this hero, or
Yeah.
restrict it so it's like one copy.
One copy, but or also can't use it in the hero or something. I get like it's kind of like messy. It gets kind of messy, trying to figure out like where it can be used and stuff. But yeah, I don't know.
I mean, so I have some thoughts around restricted and banned lists generally. So I'll start with grand stuff. I think banned and restricted lists are positive for games, right? Ultimately, they exist in order to try and correct imbalances in the game, so they're only a positive thing. However, there are different types of restricted lists. So one of the restricted things that you spoke about there, Oliver, was you can only play limit one per deck, right? And if anything, if I think that's problematic because it basically just makes it higher variance, right?
Yeah.
If you draw that card and it's that powerful, then it's still powerful if you draw one of them, right? It just makes the variance even higher, which is why I generally hate limit one per deck cards because it's lazy design. It
Yeah.
reminds me, there was a card in the set that was something like that.
Yeah, all the pulses are now are legendary, but majestic rarity.
Yes. So the pulses are a perfect example of that. They are an arbitrarily stronger card. Right? They are, if we look at Pulse of Volthaven, it's a +4 pump at instant speed for 0, right? Which outclasses every other pump in the game at that cost. It is perfect in the sense it's also ice and lightning, so it is exactly what you want it to be. And yeah, the downside is it doesn't block, right? Sure, that is a downside, admittedly, but if you could play 3 of them, you would, right?
Yeah.
So limiting it to 1 just increases the variance in the game. So I really dislike arbitrary restrictions of limiting a card to 1. On the other hand, the other restriction I think that you were talking about where it said it couldn't be paired with X card, which is a system that Fantasy Flight Games have implemented, I think that's quite a good system because generally speaking, that way you can, basically unpair certain combinations without affecting the card's viability entirely. So as an example, let's just say that there were 2 cards that together formed some kind of broken combo, effectively. At that point, you can just restrict those 2 cards. And once you've restricted those, they can still exist in isolation where they might be fine and thrive. But together, they're just restricted. So I think the pairing restricted list, even though it's more complex, is actually a lot more successful. What are your thoughts, Yichin?
So I have to argue against the paired restricted list, mostly because there's a lot of kind of fan backlash when that happens, especially coming from a Magic background, because it has been discussed before. The main reason why people have gotten backlash from it is because if you accumulate enough of these like paired restrictions, it becomes a nightmare to track. Usually 1 or 2 is just fine, like, oh, you can't run this card with this card, you can't run this card with this card. But after a while, as the ban list kind of increases, that's going to become sort of super bloated. And if you, as a new player, jumping right in and seeing all these cool cards and being like, oh wait, I can't run this card with this card, or I can't run this card with this card, that's a lot of headache to keep track of. And later on, judges will also have a headache to keep track of those as well.
What then is the alternative? Is it just banning it? Because then people still have to remember that, right? They have to remember that they can't play with the card.
Right, but it's easier to say that there's a blanket ban on something than to say that there's a ban on something only in this specific circumstance. Especially as a judge, when you are looking through a deck list and you have to remember, oh wait, this is banned because I see this card in the deck, or this is banned because I see this card in the deck. And that becomes a nightmare to keep track of at a tournament level, and that becomes a nightmare to keep track of from a deck builder standpoint if they're just like going inside like a some sort of search engine and like building a deck online. When they have to keep track of all these like dependencies, most systems aren't quite as robust to keep track of those automatically, and you run into a lot of issues.
What about point systems? So things like, for example, playing. I think this was discussed quite a while ago when things like Enlightened Strike and Command and Conquer were so ubiquitous, where you would have points on certain cards, kind of like 10-point Highlander in Magic or that kind of thing, where you could play X number of points. I imagine that's still also nightmarish to track.
Absolutely. I think it works for a lot of LSS games. I'm not talking about ban lists. I'm talking about like just, I think L5R did a point system for their splashing, and so did Netrunner.
You mean FFG, you mean?
Oh, yeah, sorry, FFG.
Yeah.
They did a point system for splashing where on the card itself it had the point value. And I think that in those sorts of situations where you can reprint the card, or you can just like have something on the physical card as a reminder, so that when you're fumbling through your collection, you can see, okay, this is restricted. This has a cost to it. I think that's great. But again, if we're relying on a third-party source to tell me what's legal in deck building, what's not, I'd rather it just be as simple as possible, straightforward. This is banned, this isn't. And of course, in a perfect world, you can do digital errata as well, where you have functional errata. It's not quite as functional in paper for obvious reasons, because people don't want to invalidate certain versions of cards. But I do think that perhaps in the future, when we can have the technology, the ideal way is just to nerf the card rather than to ban it entirely.
Yeah, so look, I agree that the practicalities of errata, etc., on physical games is very complex, right? Digital games certainly have that advantage where you can simply patch it, update, and then you're done, right? And then you have the constant reminder text on everything. So, we unfortunately we are not playing with a digital game.
Exactly.
We're playing with a physical one.
Yeah.
But what I was going to say was that I guess the perspective I come from is a bit different, because from what it sounds like, you're coming from the perspective of pragmatics and logistics, right? Which is totally fair, right? That's a totally valid position, because you can't divorce those from the tournament experience, right?
Yeah.
If the game, whereas I'm coming at from it more of a game purist perspective, right? Where if I ignore all of those things, like how logistically difficult it would be, it's just kind of would it improve the game outside of that? So it's kind of I'm more divorced from reality and airy fairy. But that's kind of the point I'm trying to make. Is I feel like conceptually those restricted lists are better than things like limit ones. Anyway, I guess now that we've kind of conceptually worked our way through ban lists and restricted lists in general, why don't we talk more specifically about some of the things, I guess, in the article? I have quite a few thoughts on a few of them, and I know that Oliver, you do as well.
Yeah, so let me just read a couple of choice paragraphs from this first. I'll start with the section on Seeds of Agony. Do you want to talk about the addition of a watch list, where we have unhallowed rights on the watch list?
Sure. I mean, I don't have any real problem with the watch list. I can appreciate that they're being transparent about cards that they're watching and are concerned about. So, I don't think there's anything particularly bad about a watch list. It's basically them just saying we're keeping an eye on it. So there's nothing wrong with transparency. And that's why overall, as in regards to the article, I'm glad that they made the article as a general thing, right? The fact that they put out some level of announcement was good. So in the same way, announcing that they've got cards that they're watching, also good. Transparency is good.
Yeah, and they definitely do kind of they're not as transparent as I would like, but I do appreciate some of the kind of rebuttals that they have listed underneath Seeds of Agony. So they list a couple rebuttals, which are basically just obvious players questioning their decision. One of them is, why now? Tales of Aria might fix it. And their response is, we expect the ice mechanics featured in Tales of Aria to be effective in combating Chain's primary game plan by slowing them down. We also expect Chain to remain a big part of the metagame despite this. As it stands, we feel there is a risk that the metagame could become very narrow for the National Champs season beginning October 23rd, and that the best decision is to act now. We want to give players as much time as possible to prepare for National Champs, and we believe it would be completely unreasonable to ban a card midway through the National Champs season. So in other words, they're not 100% sure that the new meta will fix it, and just in case it doesn't, they're just going to go ahead and ban it now. What are your thoughts, Kenny?
I mean, the final sentence as well is, we feel the options were to act now or wait until after the season was concluded, and they chose to act now. Mm-hmm. So I think that logic's good, right? In the sense that they feel as though there is a problem, and rather than taking a wait and see approach for what is probably, like, realistically their first massive tournament season, right? Like, this is the first season where Fab has been international and all of these big tournaments coming out. Mm-hmm. If their first tournament season was kind of marred by the fact that Chain was dominating everywhere, that would be pretty terrible. Right? That would kind of leave a sour taste for the first thing. So I can see them erring on the side of caution and choosing to ban now. I agree with the idea of not banning midway through national championships, because then it creates this weird thing where it advantages, say that you're a Chain player in Australia versus a Chain player in America. Mm-hmm. It just so happens that Chain dominates various national championships. Or do you guys only have one national championship, or do you have many?
We have one national championship, but I believe there are several other countries that will have smaller national championships leading up to ours.
Yeah, gotcha. So say that the first 3 national championships are all dominated by Chain, and then my national championship is next week, and then at 5 days before the national championship, Chain gets banned. These bans happen. That's pretty substantial, right? So I totally get where they're coming from with announcing it now. So no problems there.
Okay, and so we'll go on to the next question, which is, how did this seed grow to become the monster it is? In other words, why was this so overtuned? And the reason was...
I appreciate the pun.
Yeah, and the reason was, the lesson for us is we put too much focus balancing Chain for Monarch Booster Draft during development at the cost of Classic Constructed in particular. We knew and wanted Chain to be a top-performing deck in Constructed formats. He is the face of Shadow at this point in time, a key figure in the Monarch story arc, the villain every good story needs. Considerations such as Chain having 3 intellect, less than 20-40 health, no arsenal, variations to his activated ability, and the costing of some of his cards were all considered. In hindsight, the mistake was reducing the resource costs of both Seeds of Agony and Riftbind during Booster Draft development to enable these 2 commons to form the core of the primary Chain draft archetype. So there's a bit to unpack here.
I have so many thoughts on this.
Go ahead, Kenny.
Particular section. Okay, so I'm just going to break it down bit by bit, and I'm not trying to say this to be negative, right? I mean, I know I usually come across as the saltier person, but really, again, I love Fab. I think it's a fantastic game. But there are some really big things of concern here. So I'll talk about a few of them. First off, the first paragraph is just talking about what their initial plan was. They were going to have Monarch limited calling events and all of that. That's fine, right? I can appreciate that they were focusing on the booster draft because they had a season coming up. That is a understandable state of mind to be in. Mm-hmm. But I don't see why you would focus on something only based on the season that it was in. So, I mean, it's clear that, there's no rotation, right? There's no rotation in Fab, and that's an established thing. So these cards are going to be in Blitz. They are going to be in Classic Constructed. Mm-hmm. So the fact that there was too much focus put on booster draft balance as opposed to constructed balance, especially when arguably, I mean, I think most people would agree with this, constructed is ultimately the premier format, right? Whether it be Blitz or Classic Constructed, in card games, constructed is the format, right? Booster drafts are variants, which still have big tournaments around them, but games, I guess, are not built to only be booster drafted. Constructed is ultimately the end point for most games. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And one of the things I want to mention here, actually, is that when you're designing for a card game like this, it's important to keep in mind the longevity of the card outside of your immediate considerations. And this is something that has been talked about a little bit in Magic, but is really important here in that if you want your card game to last a long time, right? 99% of its lifespan in the game will exist outside of limited. So you should really focus on how it plays outside of limited before you focus on how it plays inside of limited. Because
Yes, I 100% agree.
yeah, after you're done with the 4 months of Monarch, right? The cards just in the game forever, right? And if you're not gonna have rotation and you plan on having Chain be in the format until he gets graduated via Living Legend, you should make sure that every part of his kit is tested and it's at an acceptable rate that which you feel comfortable with releasing.
I am in 100% agreement with that. So certainly, I think there should have been much more attention paid in the construction thing. And I'm glad that they at least say the lesson for us is that we put too much balance on this. It's good that they're reflecting on things, right? So again, I know I'm coming at this with a lot of criticism, but I want to point out that they are doing good things and that they're reflecting. I've got a few more points if you don't mind me going through.
Yeah, go ahead.
A massive red flag for me was this sentence. We knew and wanted Chain to be a top performing deck in constructed formats. So I'm designing a game at the moment as well, right? And I've thought about game design and all these kind of things. The one thing that has never occurred to me to do, and I don't see why anyone would ever decide to do it, is to intentionally try and make something top performing, right? So, for example, like say that I was playing the Game of Thrones card game and I was the designer and I went, well, Starks are my favorite, so I'm just going to make the Starks really good so they're at the top of the competitive, you know, they're at the forefront of competitive play. That to me is extremely poor design. You should make tools in the game that that players can use and then try and use those to make good decks, right? My query there is, is it just the designers who then are deciding what the format is? Are they going, well, Chain needs to be at the top, Kano needs to be at the bottom, Brute somewhere in the middle. We want Illusionist to be good because it's the new class. Like, is that what they're doing? Because if so, I find that extremely bizarre and extremely concerning.
So I'll play devil's advocate here because I also don't agree that it should be done, but I'll go with this with some of the knowledge that I have of how Magic's developed, where it's not that they want Chain or they want to decide the metagame entirely, but they want to make sure an archetype is powerful enough so that it shows up in constructed. Some of the biggest failures in Magic sets have come from sets that have no competitive cards in them. So there's a need and a specific desire for them to put a couple of cards that they know will see constructed play within each set. In addition to that, one of the biggest failures that they have with marketing wise is if the face of the set does not do well in constructed and is very underpowered. I believe there have been a couple of sets, I can't remember any off the top of my head, where there were a couple of strong cards, but the focus of the set or the main mechanic of a set completely missed the constructed power level mark, and as a result, a lot of the set they were building, the environment they were hoping for to work off of later designs, didn't actually manifest that way. So I imagine when they were developing Monarch, and they did say that this is the first set they've ever developed for Monarch. It was done before WTR and Arcane Rising. Was that they wanted to make sure both Shadow and Light were represented, and I imagine a lot of the power that they wanted to focus in designing these cards, making sure they showed up, was making sure that all the heroes, most specifically probably Chain, maybe Prism, because Prism seems like the alternative focus, were strong enough to see competitive play and weren't outclassed by their contemporaries in the format.
So I have some thoughts. So I can't fault some of those things, right? So I can understand, like, if you have, say that you're making the Kenny set, and then you release Kenny in that set, and Kenny sucks.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a big deal, right? Your marketing is in the wrong place in that sense, right? I will say though that, I mean, maybe I was just under a rock or something like that, but I didn't realize that Chain was the face of the set, right? I could understand that Light and Shadow were.
Absolutely.
But, Chain, I didn't know that Chain was the villain, right? I assumed he was a bad guy only because Shadow makes them bad, or as presumably Shadow is bad. Um, but yeah, I didn't know he was the main villain. He only seems like the main villain because he's been dominant and constructed, if you know what I mean.
True.
Yeah, the when you were talking about, intentionally making cards that are going to be constructed play, yeah, I don't have a problem with that, right? Like I don't have an issue with designers going, we would like, say that they designed a magic set like Lorwyn,
Yeah.
and they said, we would like it to be the case that Kithkin, elves, fairies, merfolk, goblins, giants, like we would like it to be the case that they all have some place in competitive constructed. And so they might have some cards which, are really good. And I don't think that's bad, right? But the way I read this is when they want it to be a top performing deck, it's like they don't want it to just be viable. They want it to be like extremely viable. In the sense that it's, at the top, like a tier 1 deck. So yeah, I don't know. I can understand why they do it, but it rubs me the wrong way.
Yeah, and I agree with you. I think that more care should be placed on just making sure that every hero has the tools to counter other specific heroes, and then letting the chips fall where they may, and like the metagame sort itself. So I do agree with you there. Just kind of playing devil's advocate here. From a designer standpoint, I'm trying to put myself in the shoes of LSS when they're working with a set. I imagine they consider a good part of Arcane Rising to be a failure. And that's because the only hero that has really been made it into the competitive constructed kind of arena in any sort of significant number is Dash. And that with Dash, they said that they were surprised that the pistol induction chamber plasma purifier archetype was the one that made it to the front. So in other words, all 4 archetypes that they probably were designing for in Arcane Rising were misses on the competitive front.
I'll save my thoughts on the induction chamber comment as well. But yeah, Oliver, what do you think? You've been quiet for a while.
I got nothing to add.
Nothing to add. Okay. Anything else you want to talk about with this statement in particular?
Yeah. Well, I was going to say that. Let me just go back to it. Oliver and I had a chat about this before, and I think part of the reason why Oliver's been quiet as well is that we've kind of hashed out and are in fair agreement. So I'm almost speaking for him here. But there's just one bit I did want to say at the bottom that I just find a bit confusing. So they said that considerations such as Chain having 3 intellect, less than 20/40 health, no arsenal, variations to his active ability, and the costing of some of his cards were all considered. So the key thing there, I guess, is that most of those are nerfs, right? 3 intellect, less than 20/40 health, no arsenal, etc.
Yeah.
They're all nerfs. But then in hindsight, they're saying the mistake was reducing the cost of these 2 cards. So I don't understand how they went from, okay, we can see Chain being very strong, so maybe we need to put some nerfs on him, to we're not going to do any of that, but we're actually going to reduce the cost of 2 of his cards. So I just don't know how that happened, if that makes sense. So it's just, I'm a bit confused by the explanation there.
I think those 2 sentences shouldn't be taken contemporaneously. I think they reduced the resource cost of Seeds of Agony and Riftbind, and they did not choose to nerf him instead in other aspects. That's how I read it. Where we didn't buff him, but we did consider nerfing him. In hindsight, it was just this buff that pushed him over the edge, and we didn't nerf him to compensate for that.
Potentially, if that's what they're intending on saying, then it makes somewhat more sense. But yeah, just as I said, the way it's worded, it seems just very bizarre. Where it's like we considered nerfing him, but then actually we buffed him, and that was a mistake. And it was like, oh, all right. I mean, there's the living legend part. Do you want to touch on that quickly, or should we jump onto Duskblade?
Sure. I think it does reflect a mismatch between the expectations of the community versus the expectations of LSS when they wanted Living Legend. Many people were hoping for Living Legend to act as the primary and possibly only like safety valve of the format, where they wouldn't have to ban stuff and just focus on only making sure that that heroes rotated out naturally via Living Legend. Clearly, LSS doesn't consider it like that. They will be happy to ban cards if they need to make a healthy format, and also use Living Legend as a secondary way to refresh the format.
I so I was there at the start when they were talking about Living Legend way back in the first calling, and I think at that time, well, Living Legend was different. It was when
Yeah.
I got told it, they mentioned that there was no actual points. It was just going to be the top 8 decks at Worlds every year. Any hero that was in the top 8 would become a Living Legend in the next year.
Yeah.
At that time, I was like, "Well, that's pretty wild," right? But it's an interesting concept, right? Like I can appreciate that it's something new and it's something exciting, and it plays well, I guess, into this idea of these these champion or these champions, these heroes, being being a hero, right, or like being an actual character in the game, right, rather than just playing blue, right. But at the same time, it does run counter to that, where for example, like if Azalea got banned, I'd probably just stop playing Fab, right? Like
Sure.
I'm just not interested in playing any other hero. So the moment she goes to Living Legend, so do I.
Yeah, I imagine it's mostly for making sure that, you know, people aren't bored of seeing the same hero over and over again. But I agree.
Yeah,
It
yeah.
does kind of punish you for doing well with a hero, even though you're kind of like entered into the annals. But I feel like if you're doing well with the hero, right, as a person who makes Living Legend, perhaps that's like the peak of the game, and there's not much else to go other than maybe like winning worlds or something from there. I don't know.
Maybe,
I'm not as keyed into the competitive side of things as you are. So most of what I see
No,
from Living
it's
Legend is just it's a balancing tool, and sometimes it makes people mad because they like the hero.
yeah, that's what I could see it doing too. As I said, like let's just say that let's say that Azalea over the course of time, let's just say it's over the course of 4 years,
Mhm.
right? Wins a big tournament here or there, right? Not dominating the format or anything like that. I don't know the rate or anything like that, but let's just say that she was not consistent, but over time just happened to accumulate enough points to become Living Legend. Well, at that point, she's just retired, right? It's not that she was like a dominant force in the metagame necessarily or anything like that. It's just that it just so happens she's kind of ticked over a threshold and now away she goes. So
Yeah.
yeah, I don't know. We'll have to see. I wonder what the community response to it will be when the first hero is made a Living Legend. I think that would be really telling.
What happens if you what happens if you apply decay to a hero? So if you're talking about Azalea maybe ticking up over time, what happens if you just like have Living Legend points decay over time to like only combat the heroes that get it really fast? Or would that be
I suppose there the key thing is that then it's weaponizing it as a balancing tool, right? Like then it's making it very clear that Living Legend only exists as a balance tool, right?
Yeah.
okay?
If you put the decay on,
Yeah.
rather than as something to kind of as they've said, celebrate a particular hero's successes.
Yeah. And I imagine after a couple of heroes reach Living Legend status, there will be a Living Legend format where people who still own the hero can still play it. And it'll just be like an alternative format they can do that's more casual, like vintage, but it's for people who are too old to handle new fab and just want to play their boomer Azalea decks or boomer Doranthi decks or whatever they have. So let's go on
Yeah.
to the next card that was banned, and this one's way more controversial. Duskblade. So it's very telling that the first 4 words that they use in this section of the article is "we made a mistake."
And
So
good on them for admitting that straight up, right?
yes.
Once again, pointing out the positive. This is the therapist in me coming out. But we made a mistake. Great, right? I love that they admitted that. They didn't try and bounce around it, like dance around it or anything like that. They just said this was a mistake.
Yes.
Good first 4 words.
It definitely does set the tone. And then later on, that they go on to describe, unfortunately, Duskblade was not subjected to the classic constructed testing process it should have been, particularly being a weapon that starts in play and influences every turn of the game. Duskblade validates control strategies in classic constructed, where over the course of a long game, it reliably accumulates upwards of 10 counters.
I I nearly burst into laughter when I read that first sentence. Honestly, like I don't mean that as any kind of shade on any of the developers, but seriously, right? Like, unfortunately, Duskblade was not subjected to the classic constructed testing process it should have been.
Mhm.
Okay, before we even get to the next part, that's already a problem, right?
Yes.
So good that they said it's a mistake, but it's not unfortunate. It's why? Why was it not? And in the first part, they said it was added late in development. It shouldn't have been, right?
Yeah.
In that sense.
And
The
this
next
is
bit was just the yeah. You go, Yichin.
Yeah, and this is like a tale that's kind of almost as old as card games, where you have developers that have last minute additions to the set. They don't think they'll do anything and it accidentally breaks the game. I'm talking about Skull Clamp in Magic the Gathering. I'm talking about a bunch of other cards in various other card games where some guy on the design team goes, "Hey, we're missing a slot here. Let's just fill it in with this nice cool card that we have laying around, and let's ship it. We only have 2 days left, so not much time for testing. So look good. Okay, great. Let's go ship it out, and great, we did it." That's how I
Yep.
feel Duskblade happened. Where
That's what it seems like.
and one
Yeah.
one thing I'll note is that we have a mysterious absence in this set, which is Oldhim's shield, which is also absent in place of a different shield that's also legendary. This kind of it makes me think whether or not it was either intentionally left out or it was a last minute swap where they realized, oh wait, we have 2 shields in this set. We shouldn't have 2 shields in the set. Runeblade needs a majestic weapon.
Yeah, because I don't have enough of those already.
I know, right?
Not enough Runeblade cards in the game. If there's anything that I thought before this set, I was like, gee, I hope they release more Runeblades.
Hey, I'm all for it as a Runeblade player.
But yeah, the thing I was gonna say was the next bit, which was particularly being a weapon that starts in play and influences every turn of the game. It almost feels like those 3 attributes should make it so that you should test those cards far more
Yes.
than any other card, right? Because again, they're permanents, right?
Mhm.
And that seems to be, and this is, I've said it many times, that seems to be the ongoing thing in that permanents are the best thing you can get in Fab, right?
Mhm.
Weapons, equipment, etc. They're good, right? Aura Prism, for example, all of the auras that stick around in play.
Mhm.
Any turn you can get an aura and have it stick is a fantastic turn,
Yeah.
right? And that's the thing. The more permanent benefits you have, the better. So if you have a permanent benefit that starts in play, you should probably test it, especially when it has a scaling benefit.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I hope that this has been embarrassing enough for the design team that they got reasonably yelled at and won't happen again. Obviously, time will tell. Most likely, 3 or 4 years down the line, it will happen again, and we'll go through this entire process again. But at the very least, I hope these guys have learned a temporary lesson that they can apply to next year's sets.
Yeah, to clarify, I don't necessarily hope they got yelled at, but I hope they take this experience to heart, and the game is better because of it. We learn from mistakes. We're human, right? We make mistakes. We learn from them. That's fine. But some of this, I don't know, just some of the mistakes and the wordings of things here and there, I don't understand. It's not something I would have ever considered during the creation of a game.
Mhm.
Or considered skipping, for example, play testing a card before adding it to a set. I don't know. That seems like something you should do.
Yeah.
I might be wrong. Maybe I just need to stop wasting my time with playtesting.
No, playtest. I imagine they have a somewhat weird development cycle where they can't possibly predict the results of the current meta because they have to ship out the next set before the previous set releases. For reference, Monarch was printed in January 2021, which means that the sheets were finalized probably around December of 2020. So anything that happened in between December of 2020 and April of 2021, none of that was considered in Monarch design. Most likely, Tales of Aria also suffered that, where they had to ship it out in like March or April, and everything that happened in Monarch, they just didn't they couldn't have predicted. I guess they could have predicted because they were trying to design for a specific format, but anything that unforeseen that happens that they didn't want to happen, they can't accurately change.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just the nature with both printing logistics and pandemic logistics. I imagine the lead time for all these sets were way more significantly in advance due to all these like random shipping issues and delivery issues that they had to account for.
For sure.
That being said, I'm glad they say we apologize and feel embarrassed for this mistake, because they didn't need to say they feel embarrassed about it, but definitely shows that they are absolutely embarrassed about this.
Yeah, and that's why I said I wanted to take the positive, right? It's not that we're casting the fact that they made a mistake aside, right? It's quite clear that they did, and I think it's important to dissect what the mistake was. But now that we've done that, they're taking preemptive action. Like, I would say that their actions following the error have been top notch.
Yeah.
Right? They banned, they released a statement, they've reflected on it, they've said they're embarrassed, they've done all of the, when I say the healing stuff, they've done all the repair, right? They know that the mistake happened and they're repairing it. So that's good. But it's just, it's quite surprising, I guess, the nature of just how the mistake happened. And it kind of goes back, I'll just say the statement really quickly, but I've said that Fab is a game that has excellent design. Like, its initial design and development, I think, in Welcome to Wraith and Arcane Rising, which, by the way, I think Arcane Rising was a fantastic set. I understand what you're saying with people saying it wasn't that competitively viable, but I think it's got a lot of much loved heroes in it.
Yeah, absolutely.
As well.
Absolutely.
So I think in that way, it's actually a very successful set. Cough Azalea cough. But anyway, their initial design was really good. So my understanding was that Welcome to Wraith, Arcane Rising, and Crucible were all designed and developed together, and they were great, and it felt good. Crucible felt good. Welcome to Wraith felt good. Arcane Rising felt good, and Monarch was the first set that they kind of developed afterwards, I feel, and I think it really shows the difference between the last two sets compared with the first three has been pretty substantial to me personally.
So I will note that in an interview with James White, they did say that the majority of the design for Monarch happened before Welcome to Wraith and Arcane Rising. And there were only 3 people on the design for Monarch in that set during that period.
I don't know what to say then.
after looking at Tales of Aria, I do feel Tales of Aria is a much stronger set design-wise than Monarch is. So
I agree.
I think that going forward, if they designed WTR through Crucible of War as a tutorial version, and Monarch was, okay, this is our first set, but we'll release this later so players have time to adjust. And Tales of Aria is where they're like, okay, now we have all of the design experience from these other sets. Let's make an actual set. I am pretty hopeful for the game going forward. I'm eager to see where the next set goes in 3-4 months or whenever it releases. Actually, I did want to touch on one thing that you mentioned earlier, which was one of the reasons why I think that all of these issues kind of happened all at once is because I feel like a lot of players have put a little bit too much trust in LSS to know what they're doing. I feel like people have taken we have a 7-year plan for the game in the making out of context and assume that they've already designed 7 years of sets. So
and that's to clarify, that's not the case.
Yeah, absolutely not the case.
Yeah, it was 7 years of development on the initial mechanisms in the first few sets, not 7 years of development ahead of time. So I don't know. I can't claim to know how far ahead they've designed now. I would imagine they've probably got... Is there a set after Tales of Aria?
There is, but they haven't announced it yet. I assume there will be.
Yeah, okay. So I would imagine they've probably got that set, and probably the set after done is my suspicion. Or at least, 80 to 95% done, and they're working on the set after that. That's the range where I would expect them to be working at right now.
Yeah, that sounds about right. Usually, again, going back to Magic, because that's what I'm most familiar with. Usually, Magic sets are finalized 6 months in advance of when it actually releases. So next few sets probably just about being finished, and they're working on the 3rd set after this one. That sounds about right. Okay.
Nope.
I think that's about it. We just really wanted to cover the ban and restricted announcement. Just want to get in our hot takes before it becomes irrelevant. Anything you want to say, Oliver?
Yeah. Dustblade isn't banned in Blitz, but Blitz isn't a format for us, so
Okay, they did mention in the format in the article that there is going to be a skirmish season 3 starting November. So you guys better strap your boots on. We are going to go through another season of Blitz.
Ira, Master
boy.
Race.
Yeah, she's gonna be 100%. Feel like she's gonna hit Living Legend in Blitz, and she'll be out of the format forever, and everybody will be happier, and there will be much rejoicing.
That's the real reason why they ban seeds. So Ira can get out of
Yeah.
Blitz faster.
Yeah. That's why they didn't ban anything with Ira, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. It makes sense.
Should have banned Kodachi's.
Should have banned Flick Flack.
No. All right. So that's it. Yeah, I didn't talk much because Yichin and Kenny can put words better. they can string words better.
Every
fine.
sentence needs a subject, a verb, and an object.
Right?
Oliver.
Yeah. So yeah, and I already agree with Kenny on most of this stuff. So I don't really need to repeat myself because that's just redundant.
It's fine. All you do is churn out the gameplay content, so that's all we need.
Oh
you
yeah. Yep. That's true.
That's right. The Oliver fee.
for. All right.
Sorry.
Well, that's about it for us. Hope you guys have a nice day, nice evening, nice, whatever you guys are currently experiencing right now, whatever time of day. And I'll see you next time for episode 8. 8.
Just you? Oh, you'll host it yourself?
8? Is there? I said we will see you next time.
I think it's 8.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
Alrighty.
Bye.
Go.